An elderly man, dressed in modest clothes, visits a luxury car showroom, but he quickly dismissed by the staff, who underestimate him based on his appearance. The next day he returns, looking just the same, but this time leaves everyone shocked and regretting their judgment. Hello and welcome to Untold Tales. Enjoy the story, and don't forget to hit subscribe and activate notifications. Edward Thompson, a quiet man in his 70s, was known for living a life of simplicity. Though he had made a fortune over his lifetime, he avoided any flash of wealth, content with his modest home and driving a simple car that suited his low-key life. Parties, glamour, and the luxury lifestyle never interested him, but today his usual humility would bring him unexpected humiliation. As Edward stepped into the gleaming Ferrari showroom, his worn coat and scuffed shoes stood in stark contrast to the polished floor and high-end cars. The showroom hummed with activity, salespeople in sharp suits eagerly chatting with well-dressed customers, guiding them around the space with bright smiles and attentive gestures. Edward wandered in quietly, taking in the sleek, bright showroom, his eyes moving from one Ferrari to the next to pick the best. But he wasn't there for himself. Each car he looked at was for someone else, for his grandson. He paused in front of a gleaming red Ferrari, admiring the smooth, flawless lines. He imagined the look on Liam's face, that moment of pure joy lighting up his grandson's tired eyes if he could see this car. This wasn't just about a car. It was about fulfilling a promise he'd made to Liam, a promise that had become his purpose. Liam, who had been battling a serious illness for so long, had only few days left and only one real wish left in his young heart: to feel the thrill of a Ferrari, to watch the world speed by, free from the weakness of his fragile body. Edward had heard Liam's wish so many times, in the quiet excitement in his voice, in his gentle, pleading smile. And here Edward was, ready to do whatever it took to make that dream real. However, as Edward approached a nearby salesman, his presence seemed to go unnoticed. He stepped closer to one of the cars, carefully examining its details, hoping that his clear interest might prompt someone to assist him. But even as he moved from car to car, pausing thoughtfully like any serious buyer might, he received no greeting, no smile, not even a polite words like, "Can I help you?" The staff gave him only brief glances before turning back to other customers, not offering him so much as a nod. A quiet realization began to dawn on Edward. The indifference he faced wasn't just by chance. It was his simple appearance, his plain clothes, the lack of anything flashy that separated him from the showroom's usual clientele. He stayed calm, thinking perhaps someone would still approach him. Just then, a salesman finally made his way over. Edward's hope lifted, believing he was about to get some help. "I like this Ferrari," Edward said earnestly, nodding toward a sleek red model. "I'd like to buy it." The salesman's expression shifted to one of disbelief, his eyes widening before settling into a look of amused doubt. A brief, mocking chuckle escaped him. "Sir, you do realize this is a Ferrari showroom, right?" he remarked, as though Edward might be confused. "This isn't exactly in everyone's league." Edward took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I'm aware. I can afford it. I'd like to get it for my grandson. He's been fighting an illness, and riding in a Ferrari has always been his dream." The salesman's smirk only grew. He replied dismissively, "Look, sir, we have real customers here. If you're here to joke around, I suggest finding somewhere else." Edward took a steadying breath, determined not to let this chance slip away. He explained patiently, "I assure you I can afford the Ferrari. I just need you to guide me through the paperwork and the process." But the salesman cut him off, his tone sharpening. "Let me ask you something," he said, folding his arms. "What kind of car do you drive now, and how long have you had it?" Edward, sensing the pointed insult, answered calmly. "I drive an old Ford Focus," he said, "and I've had it for over a decade." The salesman's face tightened with impatience. "Right," he scoffed. "I'm sorry, but if you keep wasting my time, I'll have to call security." After being turned away, Edward paused just outside the showroom's glass doors. Through the window, he watched the sleek Ferraris lined up in their polished perfection. He knew how much joy one of those cars would bring to Liam, his grandson, the one person left in the world who mattered most to him. Edward reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old, slightly worn photograph. It was of Liam, barely 3 years old, holding a small toy Ferrari. He could still remember the day the picture was taken. Liam had been playing on the living room floor, clutching the little red car that his father had gifted him. It had been his favorite toy. The memory of that day was a bittersweet reminder of what they'd lost. Liam had barely been 6 months old when his parents died in a tragic car accident. Edward could still recall the early morning knock on his door, the officer standing there with the news that shattered his world. From that day forward, Edward had dedicated himself to raising Liam, stepping into a role he'd never expected. He became both grandfather and father, carrying the weight of both love and responsibility. He was there for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every school recital, and every smile. But recently, their lives had taken a tragic turn. Just months ago, doctors had delivered the devastating news. Liam was battling a rare, life-threatening disease. Edward's heart nearly shattered at the words, knowing that despite every effort, Liam's time was limited to only a few months. 10 years after the heartbreak of losing his son and daughter-in-law, Edward now faced a new, crushing blow that left him feeling utterly powerless, as if he were losing his grandson all over again. He'd spent sleepless nights worrying, grappling with the knowledge that no amount of love or care could change the diagnosis. The doctors had urged Edward to focus on making Liam's remaining days as joyful as possible. That was all he could give his grandson now, a chance to feel fulfilled and happy. He remembered when Liam would run to him, arms outstretched, laughing as he played with the toy Ferrari. And now, all these years later, Liam still held that love for the car. He still dreamed of riding in a real Ferrari, feeling the thrill of speed and freedom. It had become his one big wish, and Edward had promised himself that he'd make it happen, no matter the cost. But today, standing outside the showroom, Edward felt a deep sadness creeping in, mingling with the frustration. His simple appearance, the quiet life he led, had led the salesman to dismiss him without even giving him a chance. Edward took a deep breath, steadying himself. He wasn't a man who often used his status or connections, but today he decided he'd handle things in his own way, with a quiet dignity. Though he'd led a simple life, Edward had built strong relationships with people in powerful circles over the years. This wasn't just about the Ferrari anymore. It was about standing up for himself and for Liam's dream, and he knew just the approach to take. The next day, Edward arrived at the Ferrari showroom once again, wearing the same simple clothes as the day before. As he stepped inside, the same salesman from yesterday looked up and immediately stiffened. Walking beside Edward was a man dressed sharply in a suit, speaking to him like they were old friends. The salesman's eyes widened in shock as he recognized the man. He was the owner of the entire dealership chain. The owner spoke directly to Edward, guiding him with warmth and respect, as if he were an old friend. He walked Edward through each car, detailing the features and explaining the options with care, all while casting pointed glances toward the bewildered salesman. This was the kind of attentive treatment customers expected in a luxury showroom, yet here was the owner himself, handling the task that the salesman should have done. Edward listened quietly, nodding, but his attention drifted now and then to the salesman, who was pale and visibly nervous, hovering nearby. The realization dawned on the salesman. Edward wasn't just any customer. He was a man of influence, someone important enough for the owner to personally attend to him. A few minutes later, the manager hurried out from his office, his face flushed, as he noticed the owner's unexpected arrival. He quickly took in the scene, the salesman who had dismissed Edward the day before now standing off to the side, sweating nervously, and Edward being treated with the utmost respect by the dealership's top authority. The manager seemed to understand immediately that this was no ordinary customer complaint. He glanced uneasily at the salesman, who avoided his gaze, knowing that his behavior had not gone unnoticed. Edward continued to listen as the owner spoke about the Ferrari models, keeping his composure and letting the silent message sink in. The respectful treatment he received now was a stark contrast to the way he'd been treated just a day before, and it wasn't lost on anyone watching. The salesman, visibly nervous, stepped closer to Edward and offered a sincere apology. "Sir, I didn't realize who you were. I'm truly sorry for how I treated you yesterday." Edward met his gaze with a gentle smile, his eyes reflecting understanding. "It's all right. Just remember that appearances can be deceiving. Everyone deserves respect, no matter how they look. The salesman nodded, relief washing over him, though he still felt the sting of shame for having judged Edward so harshly. The other staff members, who had witnessed this exchange, felt a sense of guilt creeping in. They stood quietly, reflecting on their behavior from the day before. The owner of the dealership introduced Edward to the manager, explaining that he was a multi-millionaire businessman who had built his fortune through hard work and integrity. Despite his wealth, Edward remained humble and kind, embodying the qualities that truly mattered. With the introductions complete, Edward turned to the shiny red Ferrari, the car that Liam had always dreamed of riding in. His heart raced as he remembered his grandson's bright eyes filled with hope. After finalizing the paperwork, Edward hurried to pick up Liam from school, excitement bubbling in the air. When they arrived at the dealership, Liam's eyes widened at the sight of the Ferrari, pure wonder reflecting in his gaze. Edward's heart swelled as he watched his grandson's face light up with delight. As they climbed into the car, Edward carefully buckled Liam into the passenger seat. He turned the key, and the engine roared to life, filling the air with an exhilarating sound. As they sped down the open road, the wind whipped through their hair, and laughter filled the car. Liam squealed with joy, and Edward couldn't help but smile at the sound. In that moment, everything felt right. He had given Liam more than just a ride. He had given him a day of freedom and joy in the face of uncertainty. Edward whispered a promise to himself. He would cherish every moment with Liam, filling their days with laughter and love, creating memories that would last a lifetime. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more inspiring tales, don't forget to like and subscribe for future updates. Your support means a lot. And remember, in a world where appearances can deceive, the true worth of a person lies beyond the surface.